The next story was loosely inspired by the mugshot below. As you can see, the woman shown has an eerie resemblance to the American Dad character Francine. Well, at least in the episode where Francine becomes an ugly wife. Here's what the story looked like. They call me Fred. I was a hobo living in the streets of New Jersey. I used to sit on this busy street corner every day and nobody bothers to even give you the time of day, let alone a handful of quarters jangling in their pocket. But me and all my buddies from around town have a solution to the drag. When the day is coming to a close, we all meet up behind the junkyard, a place we know we won't be bothered. We built up a little circle of crates and rotten chairs to sit on, and in the center, we have a nice big fire pit with fuel to burn all around us. And that's all there really is to Club Hobo, or the pit as we call it, since it always smells like armpits. The stench doesn't stop us from having a social life and talking about how things are going, or sharing tips on where one might be able to score some grub. Hey, yo, there's a new fancy restaurant downtown, and I just ate some Gordon Ramsay tier food from the dumpster. If you was digging through the trash, then that means you still wasn't getting enough dough to get your own grub. Shh, shut up. Look over there. You see what I'm seeing? What the hell? What's Blondie doing in our junkyard? She looks bad as hell, though. Kinda looks like Francine from that TV show, American Sad. The only thing that's sad is your memory. Now go ask if she comes to Club Hobo often. I got up and left the circle, stumbling my way through trash in the darkness. I could see the woman watching me approach her. All I could hear were the guys behind me laughing it up. I paid them no mind. The girl just popped up out of nowhere one night, and none of them were gonna have the guts to get up and speak to her. Not me. I'm a ladies' man. Always have been, always will be. Hey there, what brings you around Club Hobo?
Well, that all depends, mister. How much money can you bring in for a girl like me?
Well, maybe like $1 a day?
$1 a day? What do you think this is, boy? 1850? A girl like me's got more expensive taste than a broke bum like you can handle. So why don't you stumble your stank ass back over to all your little hillbilly buddies?
What? Why, I oughta... You know what? Screw you then! I ain't got time for gold-digging women's who can't appreciate my natural charm! Don't come back round here until you shave that stupid unibrow! You got that? You're not welcome at Club Hobo! After all that ridiculing, I was ready for a change. The next day, I decided to go panhandling at a different spot than I usually do. I'd just been having no good luck for way too long. I was long overdue for a new spot. But as luck would have it, right as I sat down and got myself settled in for the day, who else did I see setting up across the street but that no-good gold-digging wench from the night before? I recognized that very distinct and hairy unibrow like it was straight out of an Austin Powers movie. I couldn't miss that big head of bright golden hair from a mile away either. Every person that walked past me gave me nothing. Nada. Not even a penny. It wasn't like that for an hour. It was like that all day. All these white-collared workers strolling by in their shiny dress shoes kept telling me, "Sorry, I ain't got the cash, ain't got no time." Like I'm supposed to be an idiot who believes that coming out the mouth of a clean-shaven man. But on the other side of the street, old Miss Francine is just raking it in. Not even coins. I see her getting dollar bills, 5s, 10s, even a 20. That's when I had enough. I got up and picked up all my crap, walked across the street and threw it all down and took a seat right next to her.
What do you think you're doing? This is my block. Get the hell out of here before I call my pimp.
Shut up! Why don't you call your barber and shave that stupid unibrow? This is now my turf, and I'm getting my fair share into my cup!
Yeah, right. Use an old ugly son of a gun. If you're sitting next to a beauty like me, there's no way you're gonna get a single red cent.
I'll make you eat those words, Francine, cause they bout to be all you got left. Honestly, it was an empty threat. I had no idea how I was gonna get people to drop change into my cup while she was sitting there next to me, holding out her own and looking like that. Yet somehow, maybe because hers was already filled up with green, I started getting real lucky. I started spotting some friends of mine from the pit showing up and hiding out, watching from a distance. I don't know what they thought was so funny about it, but they seemed like they were enjoying the show. Missy Francine had a string of real bad luck. 30 minutes went by and she didn't get a dime. She even tried tried to empty out her cup and stash what she already made to make it look like she needed it more, but that didn't work. Dollars, fives, and tens started getting dropped into my cup. I'd never had such a good day panhandling in my life. I made more in just a few minutes than I'd made all month, but it was right in that moment that the $20 bill got dropped into my cup that old Missy Francine went ballistic. She lunged at me, screaming in my face and scratching at me, pulling my hair and my earlobes and trying to gouge out my eyes. I didn't want to hit a woman, so I didn't really fight back, but she was mad. She pinned me to the ground and sat on top of me while trying to bite my face off. I resisted by pushing her face away. The crazy thing was is that she was strong as hell, but before she could do any real serious damage, my friends ran up and pulled her off of me and held her back. The pedestrians all around us were gawking and yakking about it already, and a few of them were on their phones with the police. Apparently, those people had also been filming the whole time, and they kept recording as the cops came and dragged her off to jail, kicking and screaming. I heard that her little outburst and mugshot had been quite a popular spectacle on the internet, but of course I didn't have access to that, and never cared. Still, even if that popularity might have been her one chance at fame and fortune, it obviously didn't work out for her. I still see her from time to time, panhandling on the same corner. As much as I would like to sit down with her there and make a month's worth of money in 20 minutes, I know it's better to keep my distance. The next story was loosely inspired by a viral online clip called Rubber Johnny. For those who haven't seen the Rubber Johnny video, it was basically a viral skit of a person dancing and contorting in an obscure but entertaining manner. Here's our take on the whole shebang itself. Years ago, I was a nurse caring for patients in a mental hospital, or as most people called it for short, the asylum. It was a lot like working in a nursing home, where most of the patients are incapable of taking care of themselves and need constant supervision. But unlike a nursing home, the patients here are that way not because of old age and dementia, but for no other reason than whatever severe mental illness they are stricken with has made them unfit to exist in society. I've seen my fair share of strange cases and unnatural behavior in my time here. Most of them can barely talk, and if they can, it's just a bunch of deranged gibberish that they mumble to themselves while hiding in a corner or staring off into space for 10 straight hours. But out of all the crazies I've seen, there's one that took all the marbles, so to speak. He was one kind of guy you really wouldn't find in a nursing home. In fact, he seemed more likely to be found in an Area 51 facility. Everyone knew him as Rubber Johnny, but for short, they called him Roger, since he looked like the American Dad character. We were never able to get a witness from Guinness World Records to prove it, but we were pretty sure that Roger had the biggest head in the world. It was so big that it was sadly debilitating for him. That's why he had his little electric wheelchair so he could get around during his free time. His gigantic head would always hang over the back of the chair, straining his neck and shoulders so much that he could barely speak, and when he did, it was all slurred and sound stretched, just like you'd imagine it would. That, plus his otherworldly appearance, caused a lot of rumors to go around the staff that he really was some kind of alien who'd been dumped on us from Area 51. Heaven knows we never asked him though. My job wasn't to psychoanalyze him. No, my responsibility was to keep him as physically healthy as possible, which included feeding him, bathing him, changing his clothes and bedding, and making sure he didn't feel too lonely. That was pretty much my job with all the patients, so it wasn't long before I developed a strong stomach for incontinence. Roger was special though.
How's my one-of-a-kind boy doing? Are you ready for your bath?
A lot of patients get defensive when I go clean some of their private areas. That's how I've ended up with scars on my face, but Roger was never like that. He never hurt me. I would give him a sponge bath every day, and his only rule was that I never touched his head. The only problem with that was I really wanted to, and not just because it needed to be washed like everywhere else on his body, but because I just wanted to touch it since there was nothing else that existed quite like it. Roger just carried it around with him every day, taunting me with it.
Roger, it looks like your head could really use a wash. Would you mind if I just gave it a quick rinse?
No touch.
Okay.
I never went against his wishes, despite having the most unusual urge to explore the strange sensation that awaited caressing the uniquely rubber-like skin on his head. I sometimes thought about mentioning this desire to my colleagues, but I always thought better of it. I knew they wouldn't understand. They thought he was some Area 51 reject, but I knew that he was just a special boy. I didn't want to upset him, so I always held myself back. Then came one night when Roger fell ill with a mysterious sickness, and the doctors all agreed that he needed some extra supervision. I volunteered to watch him overnight, which was much appreciated by the other nurses. The asylum can be an unsettling place at night, but I had a reason that I knew made it worth it. The next night, I set up a little desk and a chair in the hallway outside his room. I got myself a little lamp and a book and pretended to read. Most of the patients are secured in their rooms for the night. It definitely was strange to feel so alone with all those deranged minds. The only overnight staff is a skeleton crew of chubby security guards who never leave the CCTV room. To relieve the tension, every 30 minutes I allowed myself to open up Roger's door and peek inside to make sure he was okay. I'd helped him get into bed already, so there wasn't much for me to do but check his vitals every now and then. Finally, at around 3 o'clock at night, he was fast asleep. I listened to him snore for a few minutes before I ventured into his room. I tiptoed up to his bedside, being careful not to wake him. I hated to disturb him, but I knew I'd never get a chance like this again.
Good evening, Mr. Roger. Please keep sleeping. I'm just going to check something.
I knelt down and got close to his head. I was mesmerized by every wrinkle, each bulging vein, and the fuzzy remnants of hair, and all the lice and fungus crawling through the folds and crevices. My heart was racing as I carefully stretched out my hand and placed it on his scalp at long last. For just a few glorious moments, I finally got what I wanted. I finally got to feel that alien landscape on the tip of my fingers, the smooth bumpiness, the warm, rubbery ripples of flesh. But then, in an instant, it was all ruined. Roger opened his eyes and looked into mine. Without a sound, he latched onto my hand and began swallowing my hand, then my arm.
Roger! Please! Stop! Help!
I pinned my foot against his large head and was able to wrench my hand free from his grip. As I stood, I realized that I caved in his massive cranium. His oversized brains were splattered everywhere, and his skull gaped open like a watermelon on a summer day. I now knew why he didn't want anyone touching his sensitive head. None of it mattered to me though, as I had already gotten what I wanted. When I looked down at my hand and saw the cost I had to pay for it, I couldn't help but laugh. I laughed myself out of breath, and I was still laughing when the security guards got off their lazy butts and finally found their way to the trouble. And even today, when I'm looking out the window and trying to itch that one spot on my head that I can't even reach from inside my jacket, I laugh to think about how I've always been here. But now, instead of having to clean up after the patients, I get someone who comes and cleans up after me. Someone who gives me all my medicine and all my food. In a lot of ways, it's a pretty sweet deal to never have to work again, but there are downsides to this neighborhood, so it is worth telling my story to those who think they might end up here.
The next story was inspired by the mugshot below. Here you can see the man has a large chin and appears to be the closest humanly thing possible to the American Dad character Stan. We wanted to make a story based on his alleged crime that may make you never look at chins the same way again. Here's what it looked like. A lot of people tell me I look young for my age. I graduated from college a few years ago and worked in an office as soon as I got my diploma, but I'm often mistaken for a teenager, especially when shopping. I recently ran out of deodorant, so I had to hit up the grocery store. I tend to be obsessive-compulsive about my hygiene, but I'd been so busy the past few days that I forgot to buy a new deodorant ahead of time before the old one was completely depleted. Fortunately, when I arrived at the store, I thought it was my lucky day since there weren't so many people around. Also, there's a specific scent I always look for in a deodorant, thus consuming much of my time whenever I go out to buy a new one. However, there was nothing to worry about since it was a weekend, and there was no need to rush. Moments later, I noticed a familiar sound emanating in the same area I was in, which seemed like someone was sniffing around. I instinctively surveyed the aisle, noticing that I was the only one there. The hell was that sound? I asked myself. I thought maybe it was somebody from the neighboring aisle checking out the colognes or someone with a runny nose, so I immediately shrugged it off. I then resumed my search, trying out a variety of deodorants, sliding its smooth spherical surface across my armpits. However, seconds later, I heard that same sniffing sound yet again. Startled by the loud sniff, I dropped my arms in a defensive position as I looked around. Still, there was no one in sight. Moreover, the sniffing had suddenly ceased, so at that moment, I was beginning to think that I may have been imagining things. And so, again, I experimented with a different deodorant and heard another more intense sniffing sound than before. This time, however, I heard a man's voice. It sounded like a murmur, but his words were crystal clear when he said, "Ooh, that smells like fresh pits." I didn't know who this guy was, but I was beginning to think he was checking me out. The mere thought of it was revolting to say the least. So instead of spending too much time searching for the perfect scent, I simply returned the deodorant and decided it was high time I left the store and went elsewhere. However, from the corner of my eye, I noticed a man idly standing and staring at me. But it wasn't just his penetrating eyes that caught my attention. I couldn't help but notice his colossal chin. And so, the first thought that crossed my mind was, look at the size of that thing. I've never seen a chin so huge. He looked like Stan from American Dad. But unlike the cartoon that fascinated me, seeing it on a real person gave me the impression he had a chronic tumor growing on his chin. I prevented myself from making direct eye contact, afraid I might provoke him. I casually turned my head back towards where the deodorants were, playing off that I was just looking around the shelves. Through my peripherals, I saw the man sprint behind me in a split second. I stood my ground, not moving a single muscle. I didn't want him to know that I was creeped out, so I proceeded to keep looking at the deodorants. I could literally feel and hear this man sniffing behind me. With each sniff, it felt like a mini vacuum was lifting my shirt off my skin slightly. I was completely terrified. I then felt his chin slowly graze upon my back as he continued to sniff. I now had no doubt in my mind that this deranged psycho wasn't sniffing for colognes. He was sniffing me. I tried to compose myself. I assumed he might have been one of the staff working here, since he was wearing a suit similar to those worn by the employees. Afraid I might make a fool of myself, I decided to stay put and resume my search for the best deodorant. But as I went back to try them out, the sniffing sound only got louder. I was as stiff as the shelf right in front of me, afraid that if I moved a muscle, the man would attack me. But I had to turn. I just had to. Perhaps there was still a way to escape this growing anxiety. And so, when I looked behind me, the creep was sniffing. "Excuse me, can I help you with something?" Suddenly, I felt the need to assert myself, hoping he'd leave me alone. However, he continued to stare, smiling at me. Then he replied, "What do you mean, sir? I should be asking you that question. Perhaps I may be of assistance." Anxiously, I told him in a low tone, No, please leave. "I'll make sure not to get in your way, but just in case you need me, you know where to find me," he replied, displaying how calm and confident he was. However, I was still annoyed. Which part of "please leave" did he not understand? I wanted him out of my sight, but I stopped myself before I could do anything rash since he was still larger than me. And on top of that, I didn't want to draw attention to myself, which would prompt other staff to kick me out the door. So eventually, the creep went back to check the items on the shelves, and the distance between us gave me a little more comfort. Then, finally, after all the deodorants I tried, I found the perfect one and told myself, well, I guess this is the last deodorant for today. Can't believe it took me this long to decide. Suddenly, someone grabbed my arm and raised it from behind. And before I knew it, he pressed his face against my armpit. Ow! Somebody, get this guy away from me! I moved around as much as I could, but his large chin pushed against my ribcage, preventing me from escaping. Even as I struggled to break free, he remained calm as he sniffed like his survival depended on it. Ow! 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 Leave my armpits alone or I'm calling the cops! Somebody help! I yelled hysterically. Both my chest and back were hurting due to immense pressure.
After what felt like hours, a bunch of workers rushed to my aid, yanking the psycho and pinning him to the ground. The man was laughing maniacally. Let me smell your pits! Let me smell your pits!
Eventually, he ended up in jail after the cops arrived. After looking through the surveillance footage, they discovered that this creep had been stalking multiple individuals in the deodorant section, sniffing them while disguised as a worker in a suit.